Recipe Tin Eats founder Nagi Maehashi has accused TikTok baking sensation Brooke Bellamy of copying two of her recipes. Bellamy has rejected the claims, saying she was making and selling her own recipes for years prior to this. But can you even copyright a recipe? That's the question. Professor Isabella Alexander from the UTS Faculty of Law is a copyright expert, and she joins us now from Sydney. Good morning to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Let's
start with exactly that question. Talk us through where the copyright law sits in a case like this.
Well, interestingly, you can copyright a recipe. You can't copyright the idea or the dish, so you can't copyright chocolate cake or caramel slice or baklava. What the copyright protects, though, is the particular form of the recipe. So, again, not just the ingredients. If you need to make a chocolate cake, you're going to have to use flour and eggs and cocoa. But how has the recipe book writer or the chef expressed that recipe? So what ingredients, what order have they put the ingredients in, what quantities have they used? And then most importantly, the instructions. So how have they written out the instructions for the actual baking? Because that's where a recipe book author and a chef can show their own individuality and originality and make their real contribution to that dish. So that's where the copyright would subsist in a recipe.
Okay, so we're talking about copied recipes this morning, but this isn't uncommon, right? We've seen recent claims of copied makeup recipes, for example. So looking at it all more broadly, what protections are in place for that?
For makeup recipes, well, again, I suppose makeup might be slightly different because that would be a product and that might be protected under a different intellectual property regime. So perhaps the law of confidentiality or trade secrets, or perhaps patents. But so copyright protects the what is written, so the literary expression of the work. It's not protecting it, back in the recipe case, it's not protecting the cake itself. That's not something that copyright could protect, or similarly makeup. It's not one of the works that copyright protects. And again, you can't stop anyone from baking a cake from your particular recipe. That is, after all, the point of writing a recipe book.
Of course, there have been new allegations, one new allegation overnight. So just to be really clear, the ABC is not suggesting that any plagiarism has happened. But what I want to ask you is, how common are these cases? I feel like we don't hear about this a lot in cooking.
They probably not that common, partly because I think probably of a lot of kind of ethical standards, so chefs will generally not copy from other chefs, or if they do, they'll attribute it. So you will quite often see in recipe books one chef saying, this is my version of Nigella Lawson's chocolate cake, for example. So they will, and that tends to be fairly accepted, I would say, within the industry. Another interesting point I think that Nagi has made in her allegation is that she wasn't given credit for the recipes, and that's an interesting thing to note. So for authors, credit is really important, and a little known fact is that is also protected under the Copyright Act. So one of the moral rights that authors have is the right to be attributed as an author, and that's often just as important for authors as the fact that their work has been copied.
Yeah.
Another thing, I suppose, is that recipes often build on other recipes, so that's how chefs learn to cook and get better, so they're always drawing on other people's recipes. The question is whether you have come too close to it, whether you've copied it in an almost identical or format, and that's where the line is drawn. And it is hard to prove because, as I said, you have to, in order to make a chocolate cake, you have to use the same kind of ingredients, so they can be difficult to prove as well.
Exactly, it's complex. Just quickly before we let you go, let's talk about the publisher, because Penguin Random House published Bellamy's book. So what are their obligations?
Well, publishers can also be liable for copyright infringements. They might not have done the copying themselves, but they have published the allegedly copied works. So if a publisher publishes something that's copied, they too can be liable for copyright infringement.